Hello and welcome back to Heights Library's podcast, Unpacking 1619, where you can explore the interviews we've collected with scholars from around the country, in which we unpack topics relating to race in America. I'm your host, John Pichet, and I'm thrilled to share these interviews with you here. Thomas Craemer, Department of Public Policy at the University of Connecticut, helps us put some dollar amounts behind the debate of slavery reparations, citing his article, Estimating Slavery Reparations, which looked at Germany and other countries that have successfully undertaken reparations. We spoke about this on May 12th, 2021.
My name is Thomas Craemer. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Public Policy at the University of Connecticut. And my research is in implicit and explicit racial attitudes and how they influence people's opinions on race-related topics, among them affirmative action or government aid to minorities, but also reparations. And I focused recently on reparations research.
That's fantastic. And I'd like to begin with just kind of when you talk about reparations, what are you talking about specifically?
Well, basically, my analysis has so far been limited to US slavery reparations. And I should mention that my interest in reparations stems from my experience of growing up in Germany and having to deal with the history of Holocaust and meeting a Holocaust survivor who actually received reparations from West Germany and befriending him and learning more about what it meant. So when I became a citizen in the United States, I was interested in race-related questions and also in the question of reparations. And in the United States, of course, this refers to reparations for African Americans. And that can be for slavery, unpaid wages and lost inheritances, or it could be for discrimination after slavery ended, the Jim Crow period, but also racial discrimination during the New Deal era and up to the present day. Which all have wealth implications for African Americans living today, meaning they inherit less than they would have otherwise had these injustices not happened. So I focused on a very narrow slice of that, just slavery, not colonial slavery, only slavery during the United States. And I did not look at discrimination after slavery. And I should mention that's not because those other injustices aren't important, quite to the contrary, they're very important. And they deserve reparations as well. I just wanted to focus on a time period where there's a lot of historical documentation and where it's fairly easy to come up with rough back of the envelope estimate. And that's what I did in 2015 with this paper. And basically the idea was to estimate the population of enslaved men, women, and children in each year between 1776 and 1860. I'm omitting the Civil War years because it's very difficult to come to reliable estimates of the enslaved population during the Civil War. That makes my estimate very conservative, of course. And also the fact that I'm ignoring anything before 1776 also makes the estimate very conservative. So what I did is I estimated, based on census records, the population in each year, the enslaved population that was available, and multiplied that with the number of hours that were available to slave owners during that time. And that is 365 times 24 hours a day, because the slaves had no control over any hour of their day. Even rest was prescribed by the slave owner according to the slave owner's best interest, not the self-interest of the enslaved. And what I then did is I multiplied these numbers of hours per year with very low hourly wages, namely unskilled labor during that time. And it's really amazing. I mean, in 1790, I believe the hourly wage for unskilled labor was 2 cents per hour. By 1860, it had risen astronomically to 8 cents per hour. So very, very conservative. Many of the enslaved were skilled, actually. So taking unskilled wages is a conservative assumption. And then the puny amounts are actually quite astonishing. And just multiplying them with the number of hours available, I came up with an estimate in 2009 dollars of $14.5 trillion. That was roughly 1 year's worth of the US GDP at the time. In the meantime, if I compound it further up to today, it's between 18 and 20 trillion dollars in current currency. Each year it increases, so there is an incentive built in. The sooner we pay off reparations, the better for both sides. But that's usually not considered. There is somehow this idea that inheritances dissolve over time, but they don't. They actually accumulate in more and more hands usually, and they earn interest, and the inheritance itself grows. And it currently earns interest in the hands of those whose ancestors did not do the hard work, whereas those individuals whose ancestors did do the hard work are excluded from those benefits. And that is a present day injustice that in my mind requires a form of reparation.
Yeah, and that brings up, you have several examples of times when the United States has played a role in paying the slave owners for loss of property. And the two that you mentioned are the Haiti independence and the France, I don't know how you say the exploitations.
The spoliations claims.
Yeah, thank you. My mind would say exploitation, like exploitation, but yeah.
Yeah, spoliation.
You can talk a little bit about those two.
Yeah, the spoliations claims are an obscure legal thing. It's just, there's often this argument that we can't trace property rights over many generations, and who is and is not entitled to inheritances that come from an injustice that's long ago. So basically the argument is let bygones be bygones. But there is an example in the United States of those spoliations claims, which are very obscure. They come basically from the fact that France helped the United States win the Revolutionary War. And in return, the United States declared they would help France should it ever face any challenges to its colonies in the Caribbean. That happened when the Haitian Revolution broke out. France asked for military aid from the United States, and the United States said, no, thank you. So basically what the French started doing was it captured American ships and took the cargo. And that was called the spoliations. And the ship owners, of course, demanded reparations from France for that lost property. And all this happened in the 1790s. So it's long ago. Yeah, eventually the United States concluded a contract with France, a contract of friendship that absolved France from having to pay reparations to the ship owners, and it absolved the United States from having to help militarily based on that contract with the king. So all seemed well, except the ship owner said, well, American government, you can't do that. Fifth Amendment, you cannot take our property for public use without just compensation. And so they fought, their heirs fought for compensation. And the main debate around that happened during the Civil War. So that was in the 1860s, when actually the historical injustice had happened in the 1790s. And eventually those claims were paid out, I think in the 1910s. So in 1913 or something, those spoliations were still being paid out. So in the 20th century, so that's a long time ago. And there was this argument that actually older claims are more important than younger claims. And despite the fact that the United States was going through a civil war, it had to honor those old claims. And there's some very lofty rhetoric around that. They are passed down in families from generation to generation. We have to honor them in order to, you know, our word to be credible. I'm paraphrasing here very poorly, but so that is a legal example of multi-generational reparations that were actually paid out. The other case you mentioned was the Haitian independence debt. That was directly slavery related. The spoliations claims were not, but the Haitian independence debt was slavery related, in that Haiti was the first country in the world to permanently abolish slavery, declared its independence from France when they tried to reinstitute slavery there. And France demanded in 1825, so the revolution was from 1791 to 1804. And in 1825, the French king sent a naval, the Navy basically to blockade Haiti and to demand reparations for the abolition of slavery, namely reparations for the former French slave owners that had fled back to France for their benefit. The French government also employed an army of historians and archivists and genealogists to figure out exactly who the descendants of those original claimants were that would receive the reparations. So that was called the État détaillé, a 6-volume compendium of every French person that had owned property, including human property, in Haiti. And Haiti agreed to paying those reparations in return for France accepting its independence. That's why it's called the independence debt. Haiti paid those reparations from 1825 all the way to 1947. So 2 years after World War II, they were still paying those payments down. They basically used, they had to use French banks and take up loans and service those loans until 1947. At that time, the United States was in charge of the Haitian treasury because they had occupied Haiti, and they made sure that Haiti first serviced the debt before developing Haiti itself. That's why Haiti is still a very poor country today. So it's outlandish that a country would have to pay reparations to slave owners, but it was not the only country. Great Britain paid reparations to slave owners when it abolished slavery in 1833, and it took up loans just like Haiti did, and it paid those loans back from 1833 all the way to 2015. So basically 6 years ago, they stopped the last payment. It boggles the mind. And the United States also paid reparations to slave owners, and that was during the Civil War, at the height of the Civil War, when really every penny counted for the defense of the Union. The Lincoln administration abolished slavery in Washington, D.C. and paid $300 per enslaved person, which was a lot of money at the time. $300 per enslaved person, not to the enslaved, but to the slave owners. And they took the money, and it's mind-boggling that during a civil war, such a transaction would take place.
Yeah, and that leads directly to, I was really intrigued by how you tie all of this together into the stimulus packages of Bush and Obama. And I would imagine also you could also tie it to the current ones.
Current ones are closer in magnitude than the Bush-Obama ones were.
Yeah.
So the stimulus packages, of course, were much smaller, but the idea is it's possible. And also the stimulus packages under Bush and Obama largely went to the guilty parties that caused the crisis to begin with, which is crazy if you think about it. A fairer way is kind of the COVID-19 stimulus packages under Trump and Biden to cut checks to citizens. And it was basically a very good dress rehearsal how something like that can be done very easily through the IRS. Yeah, it would seem that, you know, of course, the amount for slavery reparations would be much larger, so and many times larger. But we have become used to talking about the trillions, and it would be in the trillions. So a minimum, in my mind, is closing the black-white wealth gap, which I looked at in 2018 dollars. It was around $325,000 per person. So that would be a minimum that would cost maybe 10, 11 trillion dollars. My estimate is a little higher from just taking the hourly wages. I think you can, you know, it would be fair to go above and beyond, because there is so much time that that non-payment created actual need and suffering on the side of many generations of African Americans. So it should be a little more generous than just covering the basic necessities. But yeah, it could be done. I think it should be done. And of course, the question is how, and one way would be that the federal government cuts a check, and the federal government itself could then go to research estates that were accumulated through slave labor, or companies that benefited through slave labor, and tax that property and kind of get part of that money back. Probably not all of it, but part of it, because the money is still around.
Right. And I mean, I think that's the important thing, is that the money is still around.
Yes.
And that's where it's kind of where your analysis kind of looks at that, and how you, what am I trying to say? How you calculated it was incredibly fascinating. And I think that if you want to talk a little bit more on that, or.
Yeah, I think there's one thought that comes up in the mind of many people is like, why should I pay reparations? My ancestors were immigrants and had nothing to do with slavery. And I myself am a recent immigrant myself. I came to the United States in the year 2000 and later became a naturalized citizen. And to me, it's the opportunities that attracted me to America. You know, this is economic opportunities that you don't have elsewhere. And of course, indirectly, they were definitely financed through slave labor as a large involuntary loan, so to speak, that basically gave the American economy its startup capital. And so in a way, we all, black, white, green, yellow, polka dots, we all indirectly benefit from the slave labor that the ancestors of enslaved African Americans, or the enslaved ancestors of African Americans provided. And therefore, I feel that even I, as a recent immigrant, would be responsible to have to pay my share of reparations for the opportunities that I'm being offered here. And then, of course, there is more direct connections, and that's the companies that benefited from slavery. For example, insurance companies in Connecticut that sold insurance policies on insuring, you know, life insurance policies for enslaved people. That sounds great because, oh, protecting their life. No, it made their life more expendable. That, and then of course, there's many estates in the South that's easy to research because those families are in the census records, the names are known, their wills are in local archives. It's all, you know, the government would have to invest some, like the French government did, to have archivists and historians and genealogists to get to work. But this is certainly possible to obtain that information. There is a lot of hard facts around.
Yeah, yes. And the other article that I read, and I don't know if you want to talk about this a little bit more, but you touched on it in the beginning of your introduction about the German Holocaust reparations and kind of how that, because it seems to me like what you're laying out is very similar to what the Germans have done as far as making businesses contribute and those kind of things.
Right. There are similarities. There are things that we can learn from German Holocaust reparations, both positive and negative, you know, what to do and what not to do. I think the positive lesson from German reparations to Holocaust victims is start as early as possible. You know, don't wait. The German government invited the Israeli government for negotiations about reparations, I think in earlier, but in 1952, the negotiations actually happened. There was some hiccup back and forth. In Israel, there was a strong movement against direct negotiations with Germany because they felt that was unseemly for understandable reasons. But eventually in 1952, an agreement was reached. So that was only a few years after the war. And the agreement contained a sum that went to Israel to house Holocaust refugees from Germany or from Europe in Israel. And it probably helped Israel to survive economically during a very intense crisis, economic crisis. And then there was a portion that went to the Jewish Claims Conference, an organization that basically, if I understand it correctly, supported Holocaust victims in the diaspora. And then the Israeli government insisted very strongly on Germany passing laws for open-ended reparations to survivors of the Holocaust. And Germany passed those laws and has since paid reparations. They were amended and they're still being paid out today. I saw some estimate. I have an estimate, I think, in the paper that's very conservative because I only could find records until the 1980s or 70s. In the meantime, I saw one estimate that doubles my estimate from someone who was involved in Holocaust negotiations. Later on in the 1990s and 2000s, a fund was established under American pressure, which I thought was very salutary pressure. A fund was established to compensate surviving slave laborers. And that was called Fund for Memory and Reconciliation. I don't remember exactly what the title of the fund was, but the idea was that the German government would join forces with companies that had benefited from slave labor during World War II and fund this organization to pay out reparations to surviving slave laborers and their families. And that was also done. That, in my mind, happened way too late. But at least they didn't wait for generations later, but it was still directed at the survivors. Now, there is another argument that is often brought up. Well, nobody alive today was a slave or a slave owner, so why should we worry about reparations? And I would say it's usually not entirely true because legal persons are still alive that were around then. For example, the federal government that allowed slavery to exist in the first place is still alive and kicking. And so are many companies that benefited from slave labor. They're legal persons that would be directly responsible. And then there's estates that are left over. They're handed down from generation to generation. If we wanted to make a deal where following generations have nothing to do with preceding generations, we would have to abolish inheritance laws. And that would be the only fair thing. And in each generation, redistribute the wealth absolutely equally to every individual to allow them equal opportunities. But that's not usually a thought that has very long legs in the United States on either side of the ideological spectrum. So the alternative is to say, well, if you have inherited poverty based on the lineage from which you come, and that property was taken away in the past and is currently handed down in other hands, then it's only fair to move it from the current hands to the hands of those descendants whose ancestors did the hard work. That to me is just plain, it's a very American, actually quite conservative idea. It's just make it right, look at the past honestly. we have this tendency to be proud of accomplishments in the past. And I have to admit to the same feelings when I became an American citizen. I was, for the first time in my life, really proud of my citizenship. And it was as if I had personally penned the Declaration of Independence or personally written the Constitution. So this felt very great to be part of the first successful democratic country in modern times. But to me, as a German citizen, being used to identifying with the negative side of my citizenship, I equally easily identified with the negative sides, and that is enslavement of African Americans, and it is the land theft from Native Americans. Those are parts of the same equation. And even though I'm individually not responsible for either one of those, neither for the positive nor for the negative, I was not alive when it all happened. I was not in the room when it happened, according to Hamilton musical. But I'm proud of the accomplishments. And if I can be proud of the accomplishments, then I can also be ashamed of the historical injustices. And I'm indirectly affected by both, beneficially or negatively. And I have to therefore count myself in for the solution as well. And I think that solution is reparations.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, we won't touch on the political aspects of it because in your one paper, you talk a lot about how there were 3 presidential vetoes of the French.
Spoliation.
Yes, so I can't imagine right now there's much hope of bipartisan anything happening. But it seems like there's this push, at least there's a renewed push for at least the conversation. Have you also found that to be true?
Yeah, I have to say that I'm actually quite surprised that the conversation about reparations has exploded into the mainstream. Basically, I would say after Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in The Atlantic, The Case for Reparations, all of a sudden it became a mainstream topic, and it has gained momentum since. It doesn't seem to slow down, and that surprises me because you would think, based on self-interest, and a lot of political theories in political science are about individual self-interest. Based on that, you would think that most Americans, except for African Americans, would want to brush it under the carpet and not be bothered with it. But it seems to strike a chord with many people, especially in the age of Black Lives Matter, that there is an open account that needs to be settled. And reforms like affirmative action and police reform have basically tinkered at the edges, but they in themselves, those policies, they basically aim at abolishing discrimination from going forward. But ending discrimination is not the same as making up for the enduring effects of past discrimination, because it still has wealth implications that people are often not aware of that need to be addressed. African Americans couldn't get well-paying jobs, were often relegated to professions that made them more vulnerable it didn't make them eligible for health insurance and exposed them to greater risk. So therefore, there is a health disparity, there is a wealth disparity, there is an educational disparity that all results from the original sin, as Mitch McConnell called it, of slavery. Those things travel down the generations, and I think they need to be addressed. And I think reparations is kind of attractive because it attempts at addressing the wealth disparities in one fell swoop, instead of waiting for hundreds of years for these things to kind of correct themselves out by themselves.
Thanks for listening to the Unpacking 1619. For more information on Heights Library's 1619 Project discussion group, or to check out more interviews with scholars, please visit heightslibrary.org. See you next episode, wherever you listen to podcasts.